If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings? But you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no. The forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa.
And good day to you out there in Internet Radio Land. Welcome back to a special episode of Wide Right Turn as we are ramping up for the legislative session starting in Cheyenne. Tom Kelly with me here, and we are going to chit-chat about something we brought up a couple of times over the last couple shows, youth in politics, how myself, Chuck Gray, seem to be the youngest people involved in politics. It's not entirely true. Daniel Singh has been a representative, just got reelected to his second term. He's in his late 20s, but these aren't kids, especially those of us in our mid-40s. We're still looked at as the youth. Nope, we've been adults for well over 20 years now. And there's just seeming to be something missing in politics in general, but especially here in Wyoming. So, Tom, welcome back to the show. I'm interested in getting into this one.
Yeah, thanks. I thought about this recently. We had an event in Sheridan, and I got to talk to some constituents. And some of the constituents told me they were happy to see me get involved in politics because it was so important to have younger people get involved. And I just did a double take because I'm a 55-year-old grandfather. I'm like, well, then I looked at them and I could see how I seemed significantly younger because maybe I was, but still, I'm a middle-aged guy. When people look at me and say, oh, good, you're the youth, you're the future, I'm like, no, I'm not. And sometimes we would look at, libs of TikTok. You see some of the things that come across on TikTok. I see things on social media all the time. I see things about Gen Z, needing crayon breaks at college because their feelings got hurt, or needing counseling sessions because the wrong person won an election, or having anxiety issues because the climate is scaring them. And I really start to get nervous about, oh my goodness, how can this generation take care of us if they can't take care of themselves? So we start looking around for younger people out there, and we start finding some bright young stars that we're hoping to see from in the future, Gabe Saint or maybe Liberty Poley. She'll come back and become involved again in politics and under better circumstances. And then we have my 19-year-old daughter, Lillian, who decided that she's going to become an attorney and then become a U.S. Senator. And who am I to stand in her way for that? So, dear, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Lillian. I don't know what to introduce myself as.
Well, whoever you think you are, because I'm not here to tell you who you are. And I'd like to get this out of the way right now. Anyone who thinks any of my 6 children are carbon copies of me who I programmed to think and act like me, you're going to be sorely disappointed in that. Now, you may find out that Lillian and I are on the same page in some issues and other ones we're not, but really, what got you involved in wanting to talk about politics on here on Wide Right Turn to the Wyoming people? Why do you think your voice needs to be heard alongside those of, your creaky old father?
Well, my junior year of high school, I took a government class and discovered I could take more advanced from my senior year, and I got really into law and government, and I started a criminal justice degree, which is actually very political. And as this election has taken place, this election cycle, and I spent a lot of time online researching things for school or just in general, I saw how corrupt and awful things were becoming, and I've always had my own thoughts. I don't think I'm super radical one way or the other, obviously. I'm more one way than the other, but I think that I have pretty grounded thoughts and everything, and that I could talk to or communicate with a lot of people efficiently without sounding too crazy was my thing.
It sounded too crazy like what? What's some of the crazy stuff you've seen on social media? Because before you go into that, I just know that I've been into politics, teaching it, studying it your entire life.
Yes.
And you never took interest in it like you did until you met Mr. Mike Thomas at Sheridan High School and We the People. He was actually your inspiration, not me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to get that out there because, credit to you. I told you, Mike Thomas is a treasure to the county of Sheridan and to Sheridan High School. But what's some of the things that you see out there from like people in your age group that just leaves you like, scratching your eyes out?
Well, they're very close-minded, a lot of them. Obviously, there's a lot of parroting in the media, of course. And one thing that's really left me, I would say, flabbergasted is I have always been brought up through all of my years, never trust the media and never trust anything that comes right out of a politician's mouth. And that's all I saw as they called everybody who doesn't think the same way fascists, or that they want a dictator in charge, that everybody's racist, everybody's homophobic, we're all going to lose our rights. And I just couldn't believe it because when you actually spend time reading into how the government works, how the world works, and how things have been prior, that none of that is true, none of that's real. Nobody's going to lose their rights. And I'm not sure where this came from. I understand there was the overturning of Roe v. Wade in Dobbs v. Jackson, but they were never going to have those rights restored anyway if Kamala Harris became president, because the court just ruled that the federal government cannot do that. Donald Trump never spoke once about taking people's healthcare rights away or any of that stuff that I saw a lot about.
Yeah, I saw some good stuff too. I know what you're saying is that the Dobbs decision remanded it back to the states, so Harris becoming president would not overturn a bunch of state laws, even though they would try to do that at the federal level. But I saw other stuff too, like the Republicans were going to come in and we were going to ban birth control. Completely outlandish.
Well, definitely an interesting segue into some of the things I'm sure we're going to talk about. And I'm not surprised that there are some young people out there, younger than me at least. I don't want to defame anybody, but these are definitely not kids. But we treat grown adults in America like children. And we've talked about Gen Z and how they're kind of waking up from the wokeness, probably because they got their $15 an hour for flipping burgers. And then everything that happens when you pay the minimum wage of $15 an hour, all the prices went up, inflation hit, then we got COVID, then we got Biden, and now nobody can afford anything, and they're getting to be the age where they're getting kicked off their parents' Obamacare, because 26 was the cutoff for that. So I can see how we have a generation or even a couple of generations of younger people who've never had the opportunity, have never been put in a position to be independent, never been put in a position to be productive. They mostly don't know any better. But since our founding, we have always looked at the living generation being responsible. In fact, Madison is credited and sometimes decried for what Madison was actually pointing to was that each generation should be taking an active role in endorsing, renouncing, or changing the laws that affect the living generation, including the Constitution. And that's something we talk about today with Convention of States. The legislative session coming up has a lot to do with how people operate, how children or minors are looked at, what they aren't allowed to do, what their parents are and aren't allowed to do. So I think it's very topical. I think it's very important. And I want to make sure that I'm stressing the point. Lily, you're 19. Again, like I said, Daniel Singh's in his late 20s. These are not children. This is not we're giving a kid a shot. This is the living generation. Not the ones that have a future that they're fighting for. This is their present, and that's why I'm glad we're doing this. So let's get into some of the topics. I hear that there are some things coming up on social media that kind of line up with what Lillian was saying of, if you're this, then we're going to paint you as this as well, or here's your hypocrisy. Lily, why don't you break down what you've been seeing and what you brought up earlier and where your concerns and maybe some solutions or even commentary on what you're seeing.
Obviously, this election had a lot to do with what they call reproductive rights. And I see a lot of people bringing up this new point where how can you be pro-life if you don't want more gun control? Which I think is very interesting, as we see in some cases where more gun control doesn't result in saving people's lives from gun violence. So last year, in 2024, California and Illinois both saw a majority of the deadly mass shootings, and California is number 1 in gun control laws, and Illinois comes in at number 3.
Okay, so maybe they just didn't push the laws far enough. I mean, I know they have universal background checks, and they have assault weapons bans, and they have red flag laws, and they have magazine limits, and they have a gun license, I know, in Illinois. why is the argument wrong then that the availability of guns is the reason there's gun violence? I mean, don't we always hear it from especially your friends on TikTok or Instagram? Don't they tell you things like the states with more guns have more gun violence?
Yeah, you do hear that a lot. And the issue is just that the people who are going to abide by the law, they're going to hand over their guns, they're going to wait for their guns, get their background checks. While it becomes harder to get guns, more illegal trading is going to happen. People who shouldn't have guns are going to get them. And that's where it falls out of line, is because people can't defend themselves against people who don't follow the law.
So you're saying that making laws for people who already break the law, kind of missing the point.
Exactly.
Okay, so yeah, we're kind of on the same page when it comes to that type of thing. I saw something today about allowing guns in the Capitol in Wyoming. And it's laugh out loud funny if you think that people have not been carrying guns into the Capitol this entire time. Because there's a sign at the Wyoming Capitol that says, no firearms when you come walking in. But there's no guard. The door's not locked. There's no metal detector. There's nothing to stop somebody from actually carrying one in there if they want to. And I guess we're going to have to change the law on that one too. To at least, and all that will do effectively is take down the no gun sign. It's not as if people are not concealed carrying as it is in there. But you had mentioned abortion versus gun control. How's that a pro-choice argument, switching the topic to gun control anyway?
I'm not sure. I would never make an argument using one thing. Two completely different topics. I don't see the argument.
That's a page out of the Democrats' playbook. If they can't effectively argue an issue, they will detract, distract, derail, whatever they can. And the problem with this topic is I kind of agree that with the way, at least here in Wyoming, our first plank of the Wyoming Republican Party platform is written, they have a legitimate argument there, because in our Republican Party platform, it says everyone is entitled to the right to life from conception till natural death. And my question, and I always get laughed out of the room, well, what about the Second Amendment? What if you're defending yourself, your family, your property, or you're fighting against a tyrannical government, but you believe that they have the right to life through natural death? And everyone's like, oh, everybody gets that. Well, if that's a one-off, or if that's an acceptable diversion from the rule, then write it in the rule is my argument. I am not pro-life. I am pro-innocent life. And I think that we need to own that vocabulary and explain more clearly, no. I'm not pro-life. I'm anti-abortion, pro-innocent life. So I think that you're on the right track, but we can't just say, I don't know, because that's a crazy argument. There is something in there. And just because we have the right fundamentals, I believe, on our side, doesn't mean we always have the right arguments. We, like everybody else, we've got a marketing team that goes out there and turns everything into bumper sticker slogans, but nobody really knows how to explain that or break down the principle. They just get stuck on the, nope, I'm pro-life. And the thing we need to do is avoid going into those really marginalized arguments, because that's what the left loves to do. Well, what about this? The what if that's only the 0.0001%. So I'm not saying that they have the right argument. I'm saying we kind of gave them, at least here in Wyoming, the right to make that stupid argument, because we haven't gotten our own poop in a group yet on paper.
And there's another way to look at it too. And it's not just necessarily Democrats, but that's a two-way street. I've seen people arguing about something like gun control, and liberals are pushing that we need more gun restrictions because if we pass more laws, then people won't violate homicide laws for some reason. And instead of sticking to that topic, I've seen people on the right switch to abortion, saying, you don't care about lives, you don't care about those millions of babies that are killed. And it's just like you're conceding the argument at that point. Because, yes, you may have a valid point there if somebody was concerned about life that they would support bans on abortion. But again, you're switching the topic, and you're not talking about the practicality of homicide and gun laws at that point. You're now talking about alleged inconsistencies in people's moral foundations. And once you go off on that subject, you have to learn how to stay on the topics of law and constitution and policy, and not start going off into the alleged motivations or moral failings of people pushing their policies and pushing their principles, because at that point, you've gone outside the scope of your job.
Right.
Moral grandstanding as an elected official is not the best or most effective way to build consensus or build a majority behind your policy preferences, because you're going to alienate people by doing things like what? What did you say? One of your friends said something about all Republicans recently?
He says they're all stupid, lack comprehension skills or something. Stuff like that.
And what were the issues we didn't understand? Why am I so dumb? I'd love to hear this.
Because you, quote unquote, fell for Trump's lies, voted for him. He brought up using military force for Greenland and taking Canada, so we're stupid and lack comprehension skills. Because he never had a war, so why would he now? That kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, the whole bone spurs thing, that type of thing, too. So what should you do at your age, then? How do you think things should be? You're a 19-year-old adult. You coming in, you voted. You were my campaign manager. You've had a taste of the real world. Those who don't know, Lillian's also a leukemia survivor, so she was forced to give up a large portion of her childhood and become an adult basically overnight. Part of the reason why she's 19 and she likes to talk about issues such like this. But Wyoming is your home. The United States is your home country. This is your country as a voting adult. Which direction would you like to see us going?
Obviously a positive one, yes. I love America. There are just so many issues I'd have to unpack to talk about direction. That's such a broad question. I don't even know where to begin with that, honestly.
Way to stick it to her, Dad. Let's dig apart this one issue and see if we can't maybe develop a posture out of it and see where our consensus lies. So we have people out there that say, if you're anti-abortion, why don't you want more gun laws? I think we kind of broke that down a little bit. One doesn't equal the other. There's no guarantee that if you pay for and have a gun that anyone will ever get hurt. And there's always the guarantee when you pay for and have an abortion, at least one person is dying. That is one of my main arguments. But we're talking about banning things. On one side, we're talking about banning abortion. On the other side, we're talking about banning guns. And in my mind, abolition has never really worked very well in America at all. Look at prohibition. That just spawned more crime and showed the world how creative America really can be, even against its own rules. Marijuana. So many states say, okay, yeah, it's a federal law. We can't do this. So is there a measured, there is a fundamental God-given right to bear arms, but there is no fundamental God-given right to abortion. But saying all abortion should be banned, then I'm, of course, going to go to life of the mother, which I don't believe in as abortion. That is a triage procedure. I equate it to if a doctor is separating conjoined twins and the procedure isn't going well and one of the twins is not going to make it, what does the doctor decide to do at that time? And is that murder? Is that abortion? Whatever. So what is the real issue with abortion and or gun control separately, where abolition may not be the answer, but there are things that need to be done, should be done, could be done? What do you think about when you think about these topics?
I tend to think, okay, coming from that argument standpoint, like separating them, I don't think you need studies to prove that when you create more gun laws and more restrictions and make it harder to get guns, that gun violence goes up and more people die as a result of gun violence. As I talked about in California, they had the most mass deadly shootings, and they have an 86 composite score on gun laws. They have the most gun laws in the country. They also focus on banning these big, quote-unquote, scary-looking guns when most shootings are carried out with handguns. And if you know much about history, when the government takes guns away, it leaves the people defenseless, and they tend to take over after that. So that's why I think abolition of gun rights is wrong, because we've seen it through history that the government, it'll bite you in the butt. And after 2017, when they had their semi-automatic weapon ban, illegal gun trading went from, they didn't find much of it, it wasn't too much, to between 2017 and 2021, 230,000 guns were just found to be illegally traded. And like I said, that opens up for the wrong people who never should have guns. They end up with them.
Under the gun laws at the time, those transfers were already illegal, right?
Yes.
So yeah, let's just make more laws while people aren't following laws about things that,
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a solid posture. It looks like you're leaning into a personal responsibility and enforce current laws posture there. Those are the bones we try to get down to. Whenever Tom and I are having a conversation, we always end up with, really, when I break it down to the most, what I call Barney level, so everybody can understand, what we're talking about here is not comparing apples and oranges. Laws are not written to stop good people from doing bad things. Laws are written to provide a path to punitive action for people that are going to do that thing anyway. And that was the point I was hoping you would get to, is most of the stuff we're talking about is already illegal.
Right. And that's very plain and simple. These people wake up and decide they want to hurt other people. They've decided they want to commit a crime that could end them up on death row. I don't think they care if the gun they use is not permitted by law or if they're not supposed to carry the gun in that area.
Mass murderers don't consider that type of stuff. Like, well, I'd really like to kill a bunch of Christmas revelers today, and oh boy, I better not bring an AK-47. I'd be violating the law, so I'll just run over them with a truck. And I'm not trying to make light.
If somebody wants to hurt people, they're going to find a way. Like we saw, that they'll run people over. I mean, the UK banned a bunch of guns, and if somebody has something wrong and they want to hurt other people, they're going to find a way.
Well, they're down to knife control now. They're even down to sharpened spoon control in the UK at this point, because their murder rate is higher than it was before their gun ban. We've seen those issues in other countries. China is a totalitarian state where it's very, very difficult to get private firearms. People do have them, but they're pretty rare in a place like China because they monitor everything, even your social credit score. It's even difficult to buy food if you're not towing the line in China now. And they have had mass school stabbings where somebody jumps into the classroom and starts stabbing little kids. And I don't see it as an argument for gun control saying, well, thank God they didn't have a gun. They only got to kill 6 or 7 kids instead of 16 or 17 because of that. It's like, well, had the teacher been armed, that probably would have been a very short stabbing spree. But how would you have felt in high school knowing that your teachers were carrying?
I haven't had this asked before, actually, while I was in high school, and I think it would depend on the teacher. But I would have felt a lot better, because I remember in 8th grade, and I went to this special school in Colorado, and school shootings were on the rise, and our school got a lot of press. I was very worried about those kind of things. So I definitely would have felt a lot better if the right teachers were armed in case of something like that happening.
What would be a right teacher? How can you tell?
I would say somebody that is going to defend you, actually going to be able to do it, is the best way I would put it without hurting their students. I have certain teachers in my mind who would be able to do it, but I don't know what makes them, quote unquote, the right ones.
You tapped into a couple things, used a few words that jump on my radar there, Lillian. So let me bring up, I can understand how you as a student would assess or feel better certain teachers having guns, knowing that you're protected. But really when it comes down to it, safety and liberty, and this is another quote from the founders, do your feelings really matter when it comes to which teacher or who's going to do what? Or the reality of your safety is more important? You are safer, and there is a possibility that you could be defended as opposed to the teacher's the one that gets shot first. And I guess if it's a revolver, who's the next 5?
Right.
Because going back to that founding statements was, when it comes to liberty and security, those who would trade liberty for security, and in my mind, it's the illusion of security or safety, deserve neither. And I think that's really what we get into is, if we take your opinion and you say you feel safer, well, we've got to ask every other kid and then weigh their feelings. And feelings are intangible electrical charges in your brain. I mean, they're real, but they're not real. They don't stand up in the court of reality. So do you think there's a way that we could have this? And I think we do in Wyoming, except for it's kind of poo-pooed by the school districts. You always have the right teachers armed in Wyoming because they're the ones that say, I'm allowed to, and I have chosen to, and I've gone through the training and certification. So those are the right teachers every time. Yes. You're not going to have the hippy-dippy PE coach who wears tie-dye shirts and Love the Earth Action Club. Oh, I have to carry a gun, and as soon as something goes down, he fumbles it and ends up shooting himself in the foot. I don't think that'll happen here. Wyoming law is not universal law. So one of the things I try to do is weigh things against feelings because they really don't do a whole lot for anybody. But I also try to consider everybody else if we're going to consider feelings. You got a whole school full of kids. And let me tell you, since we're talking about youth, people younger than you, they are emotionally unprepared to deal with reality. So this is another reason I really stay away from in school situations.
Well, you're talking about feelings in schools. One of the things about keeping a place safe versus making it, this ties into the bill being reintroduced to get rid of gun-free zones, to get rid of soft targets. We talked about this before. There's a reason mass shootings don't happen at gun shows, and they happen in hospitals and churches and shopping malls and public schools. And public schools are the easiest target because those are the ones most widely advertised as being gun-free. So, of course, a maniac is going to want to pick out a place where you've got the easiest amount of targets with the least amount of resistance. And every horrific school shooting ends the same way. Somebody else with a gun ends it. Sometimes the shooter ends it themselves by shooting themselves once the police show up. But if we were to have a system, the kids shouldn't even have to think about this. The way I see it, kids should not have to be hit in the face with this reality that a maniac might come in here and start shooting. I would much rather have it that you have concealed carry. The kids have no knowledge of who's carrying and who's not. So they're not worried about, don't speak up in that teacher's class. He might shoot you. Ha, ha, ha. Because one, there's nothing funny about that. And two, it's an illegitimate fear. Because any teacher who's unhinged enough to do that wouldn't need permission to carry a gun in the school anyway. They might do that anyhow. I've heard the ideas that like parents shouldn't be allowed to bring them in because they might get angry at a conference and shoot a teacher. Those are just inane arguments. So when it comes down to like feeling safer in a school because you know somebody is armed, I don't think you really have to know who is armed. What's more important is your potential homicide maniac knows that this is no longer a soft target. That if I open fire in here, somebody's going to fire back and I have no idea who it is. That's what makes a school a lot safer at that point. And without pushing in the kid's face, which is why I don't like the idea of visibly armed guards in schools. To militarize a public school, to have locked doors and checkpoints and have kids become accustomed to the idea that it's normal to have armed government agents standing around you while you're doing that type of stuff like that. It's individual responsibility. It's free citizens, and communities should be able to guard their own kids. I'm not against the idea of school resource officers and the community work that they do within the schools, but that can't be the sole basis of security in a school. One officer who might have to go back and forth between two schools. If you have a visibly armed guard that everyone knows about, who's the first target going to be for a maniac who decides to pick that school anyway? And then we have a larger problem there. So that's my long-winded answer on that. Is like talking about like feeling safe about it. Well, the fact that you've gone into gun shows and you see people carrying all over the place, especially the people behind the counters, because for some reason they make you unload your guns now going into gun shows. But there's no nervousness that a mass shooting is going to break out with all these rifles and pistols all over the place because, it wouldn't go very far. That's probably the scariest thing about being in a gun-free zone is knowing that if I abide by the rules, I'm defenseless. And Joe Maniac knows that.
Well, let's ask Lillian, based on something Tom said, kids shouldn't even have to think about this stuff. And I really want to get your take, Lily, do you feel safer when you're thinking about your safety and you're confirming that you're safe? Or is that more of you're safer when you're not constantly worried about your safety?
I know I'm safer when I'm not constantly worried about my safety. And there's the knowledge that there is somebody there to stop a potential threat or a threat for somebody coming to harm me.
Makes a lot of sense.
So like when you're walking down the streets in Nashville, what do you think of that? You see like armed police officers on every corner. Does that make it more fun, or does that make it more nerve-wracking?
Oh, it's definitely more fun.
Those are good guys down there. We're not going to agree on every perspective.
There was something you said earlier, Lillian, I want to ask about. I think it's a more appropriate argument for your libtard friends that are spouting off about abortion versus gun control. You said if somebody does something, well, they're going to be facing death row. So let's move the conversation from gun control being compared to abortion and gun control or owning firearms, your Second Amendment rights, and the death penalty. Where do you stand on that? Do you have any qualms with either, both, or how they compare to each other? A lot of people could argue if you're pro-gun, then you're obviously, pro-death penalty, and not everybody is, and some people are, but not for the same reason.
I am not. Okay, I am a criminal justice major. I spend a lot of time on these things, and I'm pro-gun. People should have guns 100%. That's your Second Amendment right. End of story. But the death penalty, I am kind of against. I know that it costs more money to run a trial. It costs more money to kill the people on death row. It costs a lot of money to house them. And there are just so many people who kill themselves instead of serving when they're given life in prison or life without parole or a long sentence or death row. They kill themselves. They don't want to deal with it. And you just spend all this money. And it hasn't shown to be very effective or deterring whatsoever.
So that's what you've seen in your studies, that capital punishment does not have the deterrent effect that its proponents claim?
Yes, that's what I've researched on my own for my classes. That's what I found and read about.
Okay, is there nobody deserving of capital punishment, though? Think about this for a second. You talked about money a couple of times, but are there not some things worth spending money on, like ridding the world of some child murdering rapist?
Maybe this is very brutal of me, but people who get the death penalty are usually people who commit heinous, awful crimes. And I see it as somewhat of an easy way out that you just get to die in a matter of years peacefully at that after being an awful person. I think you deserve your life sentence.
Now there we go. There's the girl I know. Let's hear it. Let's hear more. This is the type of stuff you think. That is the thought process that goes into it. The problem with the death penalty is their suffering is over too quickly, is what you're saying, correct? Do not be afraid to say that. That's what this show's all about.
Yes, and
really
I'm aware that I know that they spend some time in prison before they go, but usually if you make it onto death row, you probably deserve the worst, even if you're spending at least 5 to 10 years in prison before you actually do get to the point where you're executed, I guess.
Sometimes it's tough to put those emotions into words, right?
Right.
Remember, your hand's not on the button and you're not giving the universal correct answer. The whole point of this thing was to get the thoughts and commentary from someone of your generation, knowing you're not speaking for your entire generation. This is one thing that is being lost in our legislative and even our civic processes, is having the conversation. And yeah, people want to say, this might be a little brutal, like you said, or I don't want to say all of it because people might think, but people need to hear it. And this is your safe place to be dangerous here on Just Blame Joey Live. So let it fly. Nobody's going to come after you, but that's refreshing to say, you know what? Somebody other than me is going to say something that is uncomfortable, maybe unpalatable, and true to a point that I'm willing to debate it without diverting. So definitely lean into that in any of our future conversations because I think it's important. But we've gotten down to the last quarter of the show, so let's shift from, we separated out these issues. We talked about gun control and Second Amendment rights. We talked about how that compares to the death penalty real quick. Now let's go to the other side of the argument, abortion. I have a feeling I know where you stand on it. You were pretty clear, but why do you believe abortion shouldn't be legal, or are there any type of sideboards or possibilities that in certain cases abortion should be legal?
Well, this is, wow, this one I'm scared to touch on. Because...
No, you can't be. This is, let it go, kid. This is what this is all about. And this is part of the reason people in my generation are eager to hear you speak, because they actually want to know what younger people are thinking, because so many of you have been socialized. Don't hurt people's feelings. Don't offend anyone. Don't say anything controversial. You might make someone feel unsafe. So go ahead, whatever you're thinking on this. I trust the fact that you're not going to completely end my political and professional career right now.
Well, let me temper you down there a little, Tom. I'm going to pull rank here and say, don't tell any of my other guests, even if it's your daughter, that they can or can't be anything. The truth is, Lillian, you shouldn't have to be concerned or afraid, to be honest. The other reality is you may have a good reason to be. So as courageous as you want to be with your honesty, let's embrace that. I really do want to hear from you. Our generation needs to hear from you, but your comfort level is going to dictate, and I can understand why you'd have to be scared. I'm telling you, you shouldn't have to be, and if anybody wants to give you crap about your opinions, just have them listen to my other shows, and they'll forget about you real quick.
Okay. So I would say I'm exactly pro-choice, but I'm not for no abortions, whatsoever. Women should go to jail, be investigated for miscarriages, that kind of thing. I am pro-life myself. Don't think I could ever do that. And my thing is, when you really try to crack down reason ever why you should have an abortion and you are basically trying to legislate morality, I think it makes people more frustrated and they want it more. I see that a lot. It's like the more people try to say you need abortion without any of the life of the mother, sexual assault, those kind of things, the more people are like, this is a woman's choice, it's a woman's body. Oh, that's the beginning of my thoughts on that. I do believe my dad and I have a lot of disagreements on this topic, actually, but I think that if the life of the mother is in danger, I understand that sometimes doctors are wrong on that, but it's not a chance that I think you should always take. That's my exception for abortion, is life of the mother.
Tom?
It's actually not that different from where I'm at. It's really not. I think she may have heard me say that I've yet to find, there are medical doctors who attest that there's really never any time of pregnancy is an effect where they have to intentionally kill the baby to save the mother, that they may have to do some type of surgery. There are some people who say the health of the mother could be in trouble. We're talking about severe high blood pressure. And we're not talking about ectopic pregnancies here, which those aren't viable. And what happens if those typically are not removed, both people die instead of just the one that was unfortunately implanted somewhere outside the uterus. But yeah, Lil, actually, I'm used to hearing you say you were a little bit more pro-choice on in the past.
Yeah.
But, I know that you just said you don't like the idea of women possibly being investigated for homicide or miscarriages, or the effects there of criminalizing the activity. So this is going to be a big question to think about. What would be a practical policy, that pro-life policy that a state could put into effect that would not start treating women as homicide suspects for having lost a baby?
I couldn't make up an entire law right now or policy.
Neither could I.
But I very much agree with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Bad. Abortion is not protected in the Constitution whatsoever. So having it up to the states, I think, is great. Each state make and vote on just a policy where you have to be able to prove that as a mother, your life is in danger. But when a woman has a miscarriage, that's never, ever a reason to go in and make sure she didn't murder her child on purpose, because abortion is illegal.
All right. Your dad is going to be facing this when he sits for the first time as a state legislator. Something called unintended consequences and conforming language. So with conforming language and unintended consequences, and I'm going to tell you about me, I operate off of equally applied fundamental principles. So if this, then that in all situations. And you don't have to have an answer for this. This is more to get you to think, but if you have a comment or an answer, go ahead and give it. But let's say you're arguing that there should be no criminal investigation into the loss of the life of an unborn child for things like miscarriage, or they shouldn't be investigated for murder. Well, a lot of states, including gun-hating California, they all have a law that says if you engage in an act of violence against a pregnant woman and the baby dies, that is its own charge or an additional charge of murder. So if we're not going to investigate criminally the loss of life of an unborn child in one case, would that be something that's universal? Do you feel those are different? And if they're different, how? Because this is really when it gets down to it, not are we comfortable in our concepts and our principles and our arguments. what are the arguments we're going to face from the other side? And that would be one of them. That this is the best way to suss out unintended consequences in legislation and policy.
Okay, when a woman is assaulted, act of violence against her and her child die, it's different between when she has her ultrasound and finds out that the pregnancy is no longer viable or the child has died. Those are just different, I think.
You laugh because I get it. It's uncomfortable. It's your first time on the radio, but you're not wrong. It kind of goes along with everything we've already been talking about. The acts of violence are already legal. So yes, there should be an argument for, well, that was an act of violence, not an act of nature. And I don't want to act like I'm training you here, but I think that your generation and people like you are our next best hope to have a level-headed, realistic future. And one of the things I feel compelled to do is prep you for some of the BS arguments you're probably already experiencing, and that it's okay to say, no, those two things are absolutely different, and argue those down. In fact, Tom is going to be facing that here in less than a week on a daily basis. So maybe a little honey in his ear, too, for an idea of how to deal with some of the crap. I have some confidence that he can handle it, though.
And my stance on being kind of pro-choice is just that right now abortion is a normal thing. And like I said, when you try to legislate this morality, it frustrates more people and they want it even more. So I think you have to reel it back in and go as a process. Reteach people that it is a fetus, it is alive. Like, I will never argue that it's not, because it is. And teach them it's wrong instead of trying to crack down and tell them otherwise. And over time, I think we'll see better results.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I've made public statements about it. I've said it on Facebook that I view it's infanticide. It's first-degree murder. It's premeditated homicide. It's not justifiable homicide. It's premeditated homicide. But I realized that's not how the majority of people in America see it. Many pro-life people don't see it the way I do, or they wouldn't have rape and incest exceptions for bills, because you're still murdering an innocent person just because the father happened to be a criminal. But what do we do about that then? Open communication, talk to people, and get this out of the false narrative that this is about men trying to control women's bodies. That you sometimes forget that, half the pro-life movement is women. So those are women trying to control women's bodies. I don't know if you want to say that too. And then the other side of it being that it's just one person. And that's the scientific part that's really difficult to grasp right now. But as we find better and better preemie health care, and we are on the cusp of what you would call like an artificial uterus, where a conceived baby who cannot survive outside of the mother on its own could grow in the artificial uterus. It's I can't see a woman, once the kid is removed, put in the artificial womb, saying, no, that's my body, that's my right to have that part removed at that point, because it's clearly a separate human being. That is why I like to teach others, teach my own family, that when we have these discussions with people, to realize that you're going to be talking past people who come to you and really believe that the unborn child is not a separate human being, even though it's got its own separate blood system, which can cause life-threatening problems if the baby's blood mixes with the mother's at any point, like blood clots if they're different blood types. How it has a woman does not temporarily have 4 hands and 4 feet. There's a different set of genetics. They believe it's actually a part of the woman. It's her health care. And that is where, if the pro-choice view was correct scientifically on the human body, then it would be then abortion should always be legal under all circumstances, because it is always just the woman's body and it's nobody else's business. That's where the pro-choice argument falls apart for me. It's like that argument holds water as soon as you start saying, well, you shouldn't use it as birth control. Well, why not? It's your body. You can do whatever type of birth control you want. That is the crack in the armor to begin to talk to people about what they're really doing. It's like, if you don't think it should be used as birth control, why not? What's wrong about that if it's a woman's just having a part of her own body removed? And then they start to think, maybe I'm missing something here. That's where you start to think, maybe that is, okay, it's alive, but it's not a person, okay? It's not a chicken then. Let's keep talking about it. I think it's an issue that really should be approached with open minds and compassion, that not everyone is not on the same page. And we just can't pass a very strict law making it illegal and it'll go away. It's the same way we think by putting up signs that say no guns, people won't carry them anymore just because we have those signs up. So I think I know what you're saying there, Lil. It's just like the old hearts and minds argument. We needed more people to realize what they're doing and undermine that argument that this is about women's rights, not about the rights of little boys and little girls to live once they come into existence. Mm-hmm. And she says, yeah, what he said.
Yeah, what he said. And with that, we'll go back to the original topic, and I'm just going to point out I have been to a couple of the rallies, prayer circles at abortion clinics, and I find it interesting that there are no gun-free zone signs at abortion clinics, but then maybe that's because half the people that go in there never come out, and they're not worried about death. I don't know. Like Tom said, I think it's a conversation we need to keep having, and I definitely think that we need to keep having it with people like Lillian Rose here on Wide Right Turn, bringing you a whole new series, hopefully in the future, getting ready for that legislative session. And if you're dealing with these kinds of situations, especially if you're a young person, it's okay to feel the way you feel, think the way you think, even if you can't articulate it. Like we saw today, it takes courage to come on and publicize, or even, in fact, it probably takes more courage amongst a group of friends to have an unpopular opinion. But if you have that conversation, you may find out it's only an unpopular opinion outside of that group, and all of you are thinking the same way, just not saying it because TikTok or Facebook or whoever at school says it's not the popular thing. So, Lily, thank you so much for being here today. Hope we get to do this more in the future. We'll talk offline, see if we can't get something set up. Why don't you go ahead and take a minute, say your goodbyes, do your final thoughts, and we'll get out of here.
Yes, thank you for having me on. Hopefully, I probably will get better at this and more organized as I do it more. But it was a good conversation because those were a couple of topics that I actually don't talk about often with my dad. And we talk about a lot of things. But thank you so much.
I'd just like to add that, Lillian, I will be in session in the upcoming weeks, and my ability to be on Wide Right Turn might be diminished. So if you get your confidence levels up and you start, feeling your feet under you and you start going off on the show like you do when it's just you and me in a room together, I think it'd be better for you to just sit in for me a few times and take over.
Yeah, I look forward to that, and I hope that we can continue to do this, whether Wide Right Turn stays normal or not. We'll figure that out. But remember, if you're facing something difficult in life, a conversation, a topic that you're not totally sure of or not completely comfortable talking about, just throw on your Lillian Rose colored glasses and see things through her eyes a little bit. Maybe it'll give you a little more confidence in finding out how you feel, what your principles are, what you should be saying. And while you're looking through those Lillian Rose colored glasses, you see me and Tom stop, say hi. And remember, we're not from the government, but we are here to help.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there